Welcome to the Property Voice Podcast, helping you to navigate safely through the world of property investing. Get the lowdown and updates, insights and outcomes on all matters property with a splash of entertainment along the way. The Property Voice, a voice to trust among the crowd. Now, let's get started with your host, Richard Brown.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Property Voice podcast. My name is Richard Brown, and as always, it's a pleasure to have you join us today. Now, last week's show was something of a bonus in this first series, when we took a closer look at funding of our property investments. And this week, we'll move a little bit from the concrete to the esoteric, or if you prefer, the fluffy stuff, as we're going to consider what constitutes the investor mindset. And as you'll hear later on, I'm not pretending to have fully cracked this myself as yet, and nor am I intending to come over as some wise yogi, Tibetan monk, or some kind of oracle either. Trust me, that's not me. The idea, though, is to share some things that I have learned and picked up along the way, and in fact continue to learn and apply each and every single day. And I've really enjoyed putting this episode together, but at the same time, I am actually a little bit nervous in sharing it because it's often left unspoken, this whole idea of investor mindset. So I hope you like it. But today we have no Kaza, so we're going to get straight into the meat of things. We've got property chatter, obviously that's the main topic. A little bit later on, we've got your voice, where we have a voicemail from Julie. And Julie, if you're listening in this week, sorry I didn't get to it last week, but we have got to it this week. And then we've got the shout out, where we've got a related resource actually, considering the theme of today's show. So plenty to look forward to, but right now let's get into it with property chatter.
Okay, so let's get on with this week's featured topic with property chatter.
So this idea of the investor mindset, what exactly is it, and do we have it? So as I mentioned earlier, I'm by no means a finished article. I'm not pretending to be so, not making any claims in that respect. I'm still on my own personal growth journey, and even at my tender age, I hasten to add. But I really never stop learning. In fact, I try to learn something new every single day. And my objective is to beat the course, as they say in golf. I'm not competing against anybody in particular. I'm really just trying to improve on my personal best all of the time. So a bit of a sport and athletics reference there for you. But so I don't come at this as a preacher in any way, but more as a companion on the same journey as you, no doubt. So when I was starting to think about today's show, I was trying to think about, I always try and come up with some sort of analogy, or I like to come up with some sort of analogy. And the best one in fact, I don't even think I can take the credit for this, in fairness. I'm going to have to come clean. I was talking to my better half, and it was her idea when I was trying to explain what it was today. And she said, it sounds like a puzzle to me. And that's exactly what it is. It's a puzzle. So I'm going to call this the investor mindset puzzle, where different pieces fit together to make a complete picture. So if you can have this sort of concept in your mind's eye as we go through the episode, it's probably going to help, because I'm going to be illustrating some different pieces of the puzzle as we go along. Now, if I can get the tech figured out, I'm going to try and show this a lot more graphically in the show notes than the notes that I've got in front of me right now. But so look out for that. Hopefully we'll get something up for you on the show notes which looks a little bit more picturesque, let's say, than what I have in front of me. But it doesn't detract from the content. Hopefully you're going to enjoy this. But just consider that in a 20-minute or so-ish episode in a podcast, I can hardly really do justice to the topic. I know I keep saying that, but it's true. So I just want to give you some pointers and some of my observations as much as anything else. So over the next few minutes, I'm going to run through each piece of the puzzle, the investor mindset puzzle, and present what I believe to be the common characteristics or foundations of an investor mindset in each area. Now, there probably are lots more that I'm not going to touch on today, and that's why I use the word foundations. I may have missed one or two, that's okay, but hopefully we're getting the idea of what we need to have in place, really, to have a long, enduring and sustainable career, or if you like, or career as a property investor. And afterwards, perhaps, or actually as we go along, perhaps we can evaluate how we're doing ourselves. We can ask ourselves a question: how do I fare? How do I compare to these standards, if you like, these criteria? And I know I have to say that obviously in putting together the episode, I did note one or two potential improvement areas for myself as I went along. So if that's any consolation for you, yep. As I mentioned, I'm not the finished article, but I do try. Now, some people are going to be stronger or even prefer some of the areas more than other ones. Some of them are more tangible and some of them are less tangible or more intangible than others. Some are more inward looking and some are more outward facing. So that's going to, lend itself to different types of approach, ways of thinking, personality types, etc. But what I'm going to suggest to you is, in fact, that all of them are equally valid. And so none of them in isolation or having too much of a bias in any one area is really going to be that healthy. We need this holistic, this balanced perspective. So I'm sorry if this episode is going to be a little bit fluffy, as I mentioned to you earlier, but I really believe in this concept, and it's been a personal growth and development journey for myself over several years. I wish I'd have started sooner, is the only thing I would say, and hopefully you're going to enjoy it as we unravel this puzzle. So what we should be aiming to do, of course, is if we do identify any gaping holes or gaps in some of the things I'm going to cover, we should at least try and plug those gaps. And in fact, one of my I was recently interviewed by another podcast, and one of the questions was, what is my best piece of advice that I would give to another investor? And I remember clearly I was thinking, well, what would it be? And it was to plug the gaps. And obviously that needs explanation. But, we all have gaps in some area or another. And so we should all be striving to plug those gaps. Now, we can plug those gaps in a number of ways, but here's 3 ways that at least I can mention now that we can go about doing that. One of them is to progressively learn, to acquire skills and knowledge to plug those gaps. So there's kind of more classroom-based, theoretical knowledge acquisition, reading, and that type of thing. Then we can have practical application to refine areas through repetition, say. So that lends itself to, hands-on things or trial and error and experiential learning, as they call it, putting things into practice. And I'm using the term and or. So I'm not suggesting we only do one. We can do a combination of these things. So and or partnering with others who can plug our gaps. Sometimes, it's just, ask me to be any good with a hammer or a drill, and I'm sorry, I'm just not gonna get there. It's and I don't want to get there. So it makes sense for me to partner with others. So I use the word partner in a perhaps a loose term, but we can easily apply it in a more sort of concrete term as well, in literally partnering with other people. So, learning, application, and partnering are the 3 principal ways in which we can go about plugging any gaps that we might notice. And I think it's a good idea to notice gaps. I'm all for continuous learning and development. But as we go through the entire puzzle, we might have what I call a mindset shift, or some people actually use the term paradigm shift. Paradigm is one of those fancy words you probably hear in a university lecture or something like that. But let's keep it to mindset shift. So, if we're going to complete this picture, we might need to change, is really the conclusion. That might be a little bit of a scary thought, but rest assured, everyone can change. Everybody has the capacity to change. I certainly have been changing and continue to change, but worry not. That we all have this capacity to change, and the key to change really lies in motivation. So motivation is one of these things that sort of drives us to move from a position of, inertia, as they call it, to change, to bring about change in what we are. And, a lot of people say you can't teach an old dog new tricks, and by the time we hit 40, then we've stopped growing and learning and that sort of thing. And, I just think it's rubbish, frankly. I think we can continue to learn. We need to have an attitude of learning. But the key is motivation. And motivation comes in different forms. So it can be internal or external. So driven from within or driven from the outside. Obviously, driven from within means it's something inside of us that's making us do something. Something from outside is perhaps a bit like army training, where there's a sergeant major screaming in your face that you are going to carry that log through that freezing water, etc., to get to the other side. And there's good reason actually why they do that, but I'll come to that. In fact, actually, the next area to cover is pain versus pleasure, so it's perhaps a little bit appropriate when I mention army training. But pain versus pleasure. Now, obviously, we do things to either gain pleasure or to avoid pain. A lot of times, actually, the biggest motivator is to avoid pain, believe it or not, but psychologists tell me. But, it's either one of those. And then there's a timing issue as well. There's a gradual change or shock change. Now, the shock change might be you have a heart attack. And so you have to change your diet radically or stop smoking or exercise. And you basically have to do it from that point in time. Unfortunately, I've witnessed all too many actually occasions now, people who've gone through the shock tactic of bringing about motivation to change. So, I guess what I'm really saying here is ideally what we would like is a strong internal desire, a pleasure orientation, and a gradual application to bring about the change or the desired result. Now, the truth is that instead we often require an external stimulus, the threat of pain, and the shock to take corrective action. So it matters not if it is the latter, in all honesty, because the good news is that we can create the latter scenario without necessarily having to have a near-death experience or something like that. You see, it's all in the mind. And of course, that's what the purpose of this episode is all about. So without going too far into that topic, let's consider what our motivation is. And perhaps if we have a tendency for, let's say, more external motivation, then we can seek that out. For example, making ourselves accountable to other people would be an example of doing that. Or we can create in our mind's eye a crisis that forces us to act. So, it doesn't matter so much. What does matter is identifying what causes us generally to be motivated to act and to change. So I did tell you, didn't I, it was going to be a bit fluffy today. So there we go. So we'll just revisit that a little bit later. Now, what I want to do is whistle through this investor mindset puzzle and have a closer look at this sort of mindset thing that I've been alluding to. So if you can imagine, I talked about a puzzle. So imagine pieces of a jigsaw. Now, fortunately, it's not a 10,000 piece jigsaw. Well, actually, it probably is in reality when we're dealing with matters of the brain, but I'm a little bit more simplistic. So this is a 4-piece puzzle, and the 4 pieces obviously represent a certain part of this issue of what we call mindset. And in headline terms, that's the 4 pieces are skills and competencies, principles, qualities and characteristics, and habits and routine. Now, you're going to have to forgive me because I might have put 1 or 2 in the wrong box, in all honesty, as I put together this episode. I was like, well, okay, that one could fit in that one quite as easily as the other one. So don't get too hung up on the fact that there are 4 distinct boxes or pieces to this puzzle. I think what's most important is the general overall picture that we're creating. So it's more for ease of representation as much as anything else that I've decided to go about it this way. So let's have a quick look and start with skills and competencies. Competencies is one of those fancy words they use in business, really, in corporate land, and which basically means skills. So I've used both of them, perhaps to appeal to different audiences who might be listening. So what kind of skills and competencies from an investor mindset, property investor mindset, might be helpful to us? Well, probably the most obvious one that people might suggest is understanding property. Just the basics of property. And that things like layouts of property and this sort of thing, and just having an eye for it. So having an understanding of the basics of property, and things that affect it is obviously going to be a skill that is going to help us. And of course it can help us to spot opportunities, but it can also help us to avoid threats as well. Now, as ever, I'm probably not going to do justice to the whole topic, so bear with me as I will go through the points, and hopefully it's going to give you some insights to explore further on. So, basics of property. Now, the next one is people skills. Now, we've talked about this a little bit in previous episodes, and people skills can come in two main forms. They can be what I call transactional, or they could be more community-based. Now, transactional people skills really are all about dealing with an individual or a small group of people for a specific purpose, like letting a property would be an example of that, or dealing with a mortgage broker. That's very much transactional. You engage with that person or those people for a specific purpose, for a specific time, and that would be a transactional skill. And that can be quite straightforward, really, to acquire those types of skills. Please, would you do this? Thank you very much. That type of thing. Whereas the community aspect is perhaps a little bit more engaging, more longer term. A little bit. How do I say? There's no specific end in itself necessarily, whereas there might be with the transactional interaction. So the community might be things like networking. So getting to know people who could help you or you could contribute to in the future. And building these relationships may not bear fruit overnight. So, you have to invest, basically. It's like watering plants. So, people skills. The next area is to be business and commercially minded. Now, I'm pretty sure that I've mentioned this point several times throughout this first series, and you wouldn't be surprised to hear me mention it, pretty close to the top of this list. So business and commercially minded, it's things like marketing, operations, finance, and admin. We need to have skills and competencies in each of those areas. We're not necessarily going to be a multinational company with sophisticated systems and processes, in place, but we do need to have a basic grasp of these concepts because it's not a hobby. It is a business. And again, I've mentioned specifically finance and investing properties, financing, investing principles. I've mentioned that there was a whole couple of episodes actually, one on investing principles, one on financing, and so forth. So I'm sure that you've got that idea by now. But I summarized it as understanding what an income generating asset is. What is financial leverage? Understanding the principles of compound growth. Now, these are potentially complicated financial issues, but the concepts are not that difficult to grasp, and we can easily grasp them, and hopefully I've helped you to do that over the course of this series. I mentioned just a couple of sentences ago processes and systems. Now, I'm not suggesting we need to be, an IT guru who sets up, a series of automated flags and whatnot, to record what's going on. It's just really a few simple processes and records to keep ourselves organized, and that would be very good skill or competency to have. This is possibly one of the areas that I noticed I might need to improve upon, by the way, but there we go. Just see the environment I'm talking to you in as I am right now. Never mind, moving on. The other one is landlord responsibilities. Now, I have to mention this because being a landlord, whether we call ourselves an investor or a landlord, or otherwise, it comes with some legal and moral codes and responsibilities that we really do need to adhere to. So we need to take it seriously and understand what's involved there. And I guess the last one in this section, as I say, I could probably have mentioned more, but the last one now, for the purpose of this discussion, is to be rational and objective and to remove emotion from decision making. Now, I know we're not all rational and objective, and even if we are, we're not all the time rational and objective. But when it comes to making key decisions as far as our property investing is concerned, we should always try and detach ourselves and remain neutral as far as possible. As I say, it's not always easy, but it's a welcome characteristic if we can do that. So the next piece in my puzzle is what I call, or what I've titled, principles. So we had skills and competencies, and now we have principles. So, for example, it probably help with the illustration. So, an example might be clarity of purpose and goals. So, knowing where we're headed, our destination, if you like, and to be focused on that, single-mindedly so, perhaps, is a characteristic of a successful property investor, in my mind at least. Here's one: delayed gratification. So, it's the idea of bread today or jam tomorrow. And I think, we live in a material world and an instant society, and, where we can have what we want in touch of a button these days. And it's very difficult to actually practice this concept of delayed gratification. But it is very much a success principle. And, if we're investing, very simply, that means putting money aside to invest in property for a better future. So that would be an example of how that bears out. Next one is personal accountability and responsibility. Now, we live again in a society where a lot of people are always claiming rights. I'm entitled to this. This is my right. But we also have responsibilities. And, it's a personal bugbear of mine, actually, if people only seem to look at the rights and then forget about the responsibilities. Now, bringing it back to a more personal level, it is up to us. If, our own success is really up to us. And there's a quote, I can't remember who I can attribute this to. I should look it up and quote it in the show notes. But if it's to be, it's up to me. It's just all about personal responsibility and personal accountability. We can't really transfer this to anyone else. And so it's down to us if we're going to make a success of this or not. The next concept is self-improvement, learning and development. And I put the word growth in brackets. And I mentioned that I'm on my own journey. I continue to learn every single day, and I hope I carry on doing so for the remainder of my life, in fact, because I don't want to stop learning. And in fact, I find it magical, things I'm learning all the time. Just this morning I was reading a book, and there's something new that popped out to me in that very first chapter. And I really enjoy that. And, I can apply something new every single day from what I've learned. So self-improvement. The next one is to have a good money belief system. Now, what is that? It's all about a good attitude to money, in all fairness. And, a lot of people struggle with this concept, because property investing is seen as a wealth creation tool. And a lot of people have a negative attitude towards money for various reasons, which I can't go into in depth on this podcast episode. But needless to say, they do exist, and it can prevent us from achieving true success. So it's this idea that there is abundance and not lack. That being wealthy or well off can mean supporting others, not just, being a stooge. And it's not a sin. It's not a sin to be wealthy. But as you'll hear from my personal perspective, I do think being wealthy is a blessing, if you like, and that we, as a result, we're in a privileged position, and we should help other people. So that's just my personal values in that sense. Next point is about positive habits and discipline. It's another area that I looked at and I was like, oh dear, I've got a little bit of growing still to do. I've actually been working on this quite a lot, particularly in the last year or so, with habits and discipline. I've perhaps been a bit negligent in that area, in all honesty. But having a good routine of habits and discipline, it doesn't sound very sexy, I know, but actually it does pay dividends. And there's a couple of book references here that really reinforce this. And one's The Slight Edge, and the other one's The Compound Effect, which can help in formulating regular habits, which will gradually over time build up and compound to a great outcome. And finally, in this section, is the word leverage. Now, of course, leverage means different things, as you've heard in the course of this series. So leverage is a term that we used from an investment principle point of view to leverage money or other people's money to grow our investment and therefore our investment returns. So obviously leverage can apply to money, but equally, and this is a concept that a lot of successful people and successful business people use, we can leverage time and skills and experience and a whole range of other resources from other people and organizations as well. And, I think I think I might actually refer to this later on, but I'm going to put it in now, that those who know how usually end up working for those who know why. And just think about that for a moment. Why and how. So lots of people know how to do stuff, but they always end up working for people who know why. So in terms of leverage, what we can do things ourselves, which there's no leverage involved in that particularly. We can manage other people. We can delegate and then manage other people to do things. That's a form of leverage already. Or we can indeed outsource or give those things to other people to work on our behalf. And that's probably another example of leverage to the maximum. So there's the headings, if you are, or subheadings, right, in the area of principles. So the next area is qualities and characteristics. personal qualities and characteristics. And the first one really to start with is one of being positive or optimistic. And I've written to myself a glass half full mentality. Now, we're not all positive, and we're not all positive all of the time. In fact, I myself have struggled a little bit with, being a little bit negative. I don't really consider myself to be a pessimist, but I can sometimes, fall into the trap of being a bit negative about times, having a negative focus. So it's an area that I've worked on and continue to work on, but being positive or optimistic is a healthy characteristic to possess. And indeed, the next one, being solution and action orientated, is as well. And perhaps to compensate my potential lack of positivity, I do believe I've got an abundance of solution orientation. In all honesty, I've had my back to the wall a few times and managed to get out of it by just being action orientated and solution orientated. So maybe I'll compensate, which is a good thing, but it doesn't excuse me from maybe not being always positive. So it's this idea of having a can do and a will do attitude. So that's what that really means. Determination and perseverance. Now, there's a book I read many years ago. It's a little bit religious, but that's irrelevant. But it's called Tough Times Never Last, but Tough People Do. And if you just think about that quote for a second, tough times never last. And there's another quote, this too will pass, which my sister in fact uses a lot, and that's why I remember it at this point in time. Tough times never last, but tough people do. And it's this idea that we can actually persevere, we can get through things, we can be determined, and so often we can quit just before the win or the success that we're about to achieve. So having this attitude of just keeping on is definitely a quality that would be well worth having and honing. The next one I've got is honesty and integrity. Now, it's one of my core values, in fact, and the whole idea of can we sleep at night, comes to mind. I like to be able to sleep at night. If you're not sleeping well, maybe there's something on your mind. There could be a lot of things on your mind, but it's just this whole idea of having an honest approach and having a lot of integrity in what we do. Don't be a slumlord, for example, would be an illustration of that. And it's funny actually, in preparing the notes for this, and literally on this day as I'm recording it, I've just written down the FIFA test. Of course, there's scandal after scandal and corruption and all sorts of things being thrown around about FIFA. And literally, as I've just sat down to record this episode, Sepp Blatter has finally resigned. I don't know why he didn't resign before he got re-elected, because now we're going to have to wait nearly a year before we get a replacement. But anyway, there you go. It's and the point I actually wanted to make is that sooner or later the truth will out, and I'm sure it will with FIFA, as with other scandals that have happened on a large scale and a small scale too. So honesty and integrity, probably laid that point too much. Being curious, open-minded and willing to learn. Curiosity is an interesting thing. I think curiosity is a key to learning, in fact. So it's just, I wonder what, and what if, and how about, those sorts of questions. And just having an open mind, just not thinking that something can only be done one way. There's many ways in which things can be done, and many different approaches different people can take, which can arrive at the end result. So, it's all about personal development in summary. And to be honest, not everybody is curious naturally, or perhaps has an open mind, so it can be a difficult skill to develop. But the good news is I wrote down or being willing to follow in another's footsteps or follow another's instruction. And that really means, submitting to others who are more experienced. And I go back to my army training, not my personal army training, but, the army training example that I illustrated earlier, that just being following instruction will make a soldier out of an ordinary man or woman, just by following instructions. So we don't necessarily have to have this curiosity. It helps it, I think, definitely, if we do, because then we're going to seek out knowledge. But if not, then if we know that's us, then perhaps we should align ourselves to someone who we can just hang on to the shirt tails of and follow. So the other thing is to work hard. But when I wrote down to work hard, I was thinking about this, and I'm not sure if I work hard. I'm like, well, what do I do then? Well, I try and work smart. So work hard, or alternatively, work smart. is what I would summarize as the last point here. And I did make the quote that I've alluded to earlier about those who know how end up working for those who know why. So it applies equally in this example as well. So that completes the list, if you like, of qualities and characteristics in this part of the puzzle. So the final piece of the puzzle I want to outline is often one that gets, a little bit overlooked, so it's almost like how do you do this? How do you make it all happen? How do you glue it together? And so it's really all about forming good habits and a routine. So I've been discovering, I hasten to add. So, it's again an area that I've had to work on myself, to my shame. But, so for example, reviewing our vision and goals on a regular basis, having this big picture idea and regularly looking at this. And in the next episode, I'm planning to do a kind of summary, wrap up, and next steps type of overview. And I'm going to share with you a few of the things that I do now to help me, and reviewing the vision is definitely part of that process. Equally, and again, this is, I know we're in fluffy stuff territory, so, you're with me here when I'm going to say reflections and quiet time is the next one on the list. So, but seriously, just having time to focus and mentally recharge, having a break. You don't have to run at 100 miles an hour all of the time. In fact, I would actually suggest by having regular breaks, having refocus, recharge with this time of reflection, is going to help us to run at 120 miles an hour when we get back going again. So that's the next point there. The other thing is to maintain good mental and physical health. Now, why is that so relevant? Well, obviously, surely the mental health, having a good attitude and this sort of thing is obvious. But physical health, people seem to overlook. Now, just on a very basic level, we want to be able to enjoy the fruits of our labour, don't we? Well into old age. So, we need to be physically healthy and mentally healthy and arguably spiritually healthy, but that's perhaps taken us down too much of a tangent, in all fairness, for the purpose of this episode. But maintaining that physical well-being, that mental well-being is definitely something. And, on a kind of related theme is work-life balance and celebrating success. So there's no point, I'm being guilty of not celebrating successes and just moving from one project to the next project to the next project. And you don't get to enjoy the journey, if you do that all the time. So just pause and celebrate, give yourself a little reward. I collect sports memorabilia, for example. So at the end of a project, I reward myself now with a signed photograph of an Olympic gold medalist or a sporting icon. It's something I like to do. But the benefit of doing that is it's a relatively small reward. But it's permanent. And every time I look at those images now, it reminds me of some good times, some projects completed. So that's just a little tip there. But equally, this work-life balance, and it's not all about work. It's about fun. It's about family. It's about friends. So having the right balance. Otherwise, we're not going to enjoy the journey, and we're not going to enjoy the fruits at the end of it. Getting a bit more fluffy again. Gratitude and supporting others. Now, I'm a firm believer in the principle of reciprocity, or if you've seen the film, Paying It Forward, might be another way of illustrating that. Or good karma, man, might be another way of what goes around comes around, in all honesty. So being grateful, having a grateful attitude for what we do have, not being stingy or Scrooge-like, and supporting other people who are either beginning or less fortunate than us as well, I think is a good thing to do. And I think we should do that as relatively privileged people to be in the position that we are. Next one on my list is journaling. Now, I've always struggled with this. I never maintained a diary, but recently think I've cracked it. I've adopted a principle, which is it's taken from the 5-minute journal. That suits me just fine, about 5 minutes a day journaling. But it helps to clear the mind and transfer thoughts onto paper. And it really helps this point above about gratitude as well. So look that one up. But I've got a slight variation that I use, but very, very helpful, very, very useful. And I know people go into journaling in a big way. The next one I've written down is plan, do, review. So basically setting up a cycle where we plan, we do, review, step by step. And of course, that's going to help us to plan, obviously, but organize and course correct, as I've termed it. So if things are going right or wrong, we know that, and we can take either corrective action, or we could magnify the benefit if it's going particularly well. And the last point, and I do mention, some of these could be interchangeable into other pieces in this particular puzzle, but the last point in this particular category of habits and routine is to study and to educate ourselves, and as Stephen Covey says, to sharpen the saw. So there we go. So they're the pieces of the puzzle, the investor mindset puzzle: skills and competencies, principles, qualities and characteristics, and habits and routine. So that's kind of how I wanted to outline it in the purpose of this episode. And these puzzle pieces are interdependent, or symbiotic, as they say in biology. And there's no use being very, very strong in one area, or perhaps a couple of areas. What's required really is a balance to achieve a healthy composition and the ideal end result. So I want to just pause for a minute. I've got a sort of short word on a philosophical outlook, if you like, as we're into the fluffy stuff. I'm sure you're with me right now, before we leave the subject behind. And just pose these questions to you. Which of these polar extremes would you tend to believe in from a philosophical point of view? Do you have an attitude of entitlement or an attitude of value? So this mentality is what I meant to say, actually. An entitlement mentality or a value-based mentality. Entitlement means I deserve. Value-based means I deliver. Do you have an attitude or a mindset of lack, that there isn't enough to go around, or a mindset of abundance, that there's enough for everybody? Do you have an attitude of get, this is what I want? Or do you have an attitude of give, this is what I'd like to contribute? And so money and wealth, is it only for evil, or can it also be used for good? And you see, what I'm really trying to get at here is these are what we call beliefs. Once we answer those questions, it's what are our beliefs? And our beliefs will ultimately dictate our outcomes in life. Or another way of putting it is our results. And a psychological model would say that our beliefs dictate our attitudes then govern our actions, and our actions then give rise to the results that we experience. So, in other words, what we've experienced up until now is fundamentally traced back to our belief system, what we believe in. So, by definition, if we want to change those results, then what we actually need to change is our beliefs. And that's the kind of philosophical point that I wanted to wrap up this section on, if you like. So what's your personal philosophy then? I know what mine is. I was actually going to share it. I've decided to take it out. But what's your personal philosophy? And what I'd really like to conclude with under this section is, have I stimulated you to reevaluate your current position and your desired course by reflecting on this investor mindset puzzle? You see, for me, property investing is, as with any pursuit or endeavor, it's much about personal growth journey and the voyage of discovery, as it is about property, money, and all of that stuff as well. In fact, I go on as far as to say that there's no point in having the money without the journey in the first place. Maybe a profound statement. Others might say we won't even see the end results without the growth. But I'll let you decide on that, and hopefully it's been helpful.
Up next is Your Voice. It's all about you and your property world.
Hi Richard, this is Julie from Hogarth Property Services in Chiswick. Thanks for another great podcast this week. Got a quick question for you. We've got a couple of investors we're working with down in Ashford in Kent, and they've asked about the possibility of using their pension to purchase property. They're not at the ripe old age of 55 plus yet, so they've heard that you can use a SAS to invest, and we've heard something about this, but we don't know all the details, and we just wondered whether you can give us any more information. Thanks very much. Bye.
Well, thank you very much for raising that question, Julie from Hogarth Property Services in Chiswick. And pensions invested into property before normal retirement age is fundamentally the question. Before I begin, I should say I'm not a financial advisor, and therefore I'm not going to give any financial advice. And so everybody, including your investors from Kent, should consult with their own professional advisor before doing anything else. But I will explain what I understand to be the case. And so essentially, if someone has got a pension wrapper, such as a SAS or a SIP, which I'm not going to elaborate on, but basically they're the qualifying pension wrappers, then yes, it is possible to invest in some types of property. Yes, for sure. But there are some rules, and so it's not permitted to invest in residential property. Only in commercial property is definitely one of the rules. Now, it can be invested into commercial property which is then converted into residential property, for example a shop into a house, but it must be disposed of from the pension ownership as soon as it's being converted, so that would be a clear exit plan in that case. Now a pension fund can also use leverage. Now this is something that might be interesting. So you can use leverage through two main routes. One is tax credits from courtesy of Her Majesty Revenue and Customs, I was going to say HMRC. And the other one is that a pension can actually borrow money as well. In this case, it can borrow up to 50% of its fund value. So two forms of leverage, which is potentially attractive as well. But as I mentioned, it can only be invested into commercial property. However, there's a slightly different take, which is a slightly indirect route, and that a pension fund can actually lend money to another unconnected person or company. So that could be a property developer, for argument's sake. As I mentioned, has to be unconnected, and it would be a loan for the purposes of that property developer doing works, etc. And of course, there'd be a return or an interest rate on that loan. So that's an indirect way in which they could invest their money. So that's it really. I think the key word is really to get professional advice from a pensions expert in particular, or an IFA in general. So thanks a lot, Julie. I really appreciate you posing that question, and good luck with your property business down there in Chiswick, and hopefully I'll see you soon.
And now, where you can go for more great resources with the shout out.
So today's shout out, as I mentioned at the beginning in the introduction to the show today, is related to today's topic. And you're going to see why as I explain, because it's a book reference, but it's The Millionaire Master Plan by Roger Hamilton. And yes, it is a book recommendation, and it is about entrepreneurship and wealth profiling and this sort of thing. So see, it is in the region of business and mindset. But the reason I'm particularly recommending this today in today's episode is that just by buying this book, you actually get to take a test. And this test measures your what he calls your type of genius. And there are 4 types of genius: there's a dynamo, a blaze, a tempo, and a steel. And so you got to take a test. And in fact, there's a second test as well, which is where you are on his 9-point lighthouse scale of entrepreneurship. I actually forgot what it's called, but basically where you are and where you can progress to as you go along. So 2 tests in one, in fact. And effectively, it's all for buying the book. And these tests, these types of tests, they're often up, around about £100 to take. I think Wealth Dynamics is one. But just by buying this book, you actually get to take these tests and understand what type of profile you are, just for the cost of what is actually a very good book. I have no hesitation in recommending the book in its own right. So there we go. So there's today's shout out, and really just wanted to sort of point you in a direction that might be helpful to you in this whole issue of mindset. So there we go. So we've had, quite an interesting topic today, I think. It's a topic that's not often, covered from a property investment point of view, this whole idea of mindset and the way that we set ourselves up and think. So hopefully that's been useful to you. I've got another episode in this first series that I'm planning to cover next week. And so hopefully you look forward to that, and will join me again on next week's show. In the meantime, of course, all of the show notes and hopefully a nice graphical representation of my investor mindset puzzle will be over on the propertyvoice.net website. So go over there, have a look, drop in a comment. Love to hear more from you. But as always, thanks very much for listening. And for now on the Property Voice podcast, it's ciao ciao.
Thank you for listening today. Now head over to thepropertyvoice.net for more inspirational content and get updates through our mailing list. Join us next time on the Property Voice podcast. And if you enjoyed the show, please don't forget to rate us on iTunes.